I
Hello,
should
Rabbi. Hello again.
second case of Raka. So the first one we saw is so interesting in that I feel that it's exactly kind of the situation that Jesus finds himself in, that people don't believe things unless they see it with their own eyes. And I
Hmm.
think that to use that Raka, this idea of fool for that, it would be very apropos. Okay. The second case, again, there's lots of cases, but the next case we see from the same Babylonian Talmud from Brachos 32b. And here's a story. I thought you'd like this. The sages taught there was a incident with a particular pious man who was praying while traveling along his path when an officer, a non-Jewish officer, came and greeted him. The pious man did not pause from his prayer and did not respond with a greeting, which is a bad idea. When the officers come, they want to say, stop what you're doing. The officer waited for him until he finished the prayer. So why would a person not stop their prayer? Because they're living almost like in a different reality. They go, this is less important than that. So after he finished his prayer, the officer said to him, the officer waited for him to finish because he was so annoyed at this guy. You good for nothing, or aka Eureka, you endangered yourself. I should have killed you, in other words. And then of course, like a good non-Jew, he quotes a verse from Deuteronomy. Isn't it written in your Torah, take utmost care and guard yourself diligently, keep yourself alive, aka. And is it also written, he's so religious, this non-Jew, he quotes two verses from Deuteronomy. Take therefore good heed unto yourself. So why did this person continue praying, and not worry about his own life that apparently this hegemon, this non-Jewish officer was able to take? So he says, when I greeted you, why did you not respond for greeting? Were I to sever your head with a sword, who would hold me accountable for your spilled blood? The,
Wow.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
the pious man said to him, wait, oh my God, wait for me until I will appease you with my words. He said to him, had you been standing before a flesh and blood king and your friend came and greeted you, would you return his greeting? The officer said to him, no. The pious man continued, and if you would greet him, what would they do to you? The officer said, they would cut off my head with a sword, just like I wanted to do you. The pious man said to him, isn't this the matter, a fortiori, a kavachomer argument? You who are standing before a king of flesh and blood, of whom you fear is limited, because today is here, but tomorrow he is in the grave, would have reacted that way. I, who is standing and praying before the Supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, who lives and endures for all eternity,
Yeah.
more so, I should not pause to respond to someone else's greeting. When the officer heard this, the officer was immediately appeased, and the pious man returned home in peace. So I think this is another example. This one is specifically interesting because, first of all, the non-Jew calling a Jew, it's something that is a common word to cast aspersions on people in that time period. It's not like you don't say it to a Jew or non-Jew. It's the phrase for a person who makes what he believes to be an ill decision on someone else's part. So while the
Hmm.
last case was you call it our first case is that you call Reka to someone who lacks the ability to believe you until he sees it. In this case, it's someone who is acting what you perceive to be stupid, but might be justified. We see this again in this case. If anything, Jesus is coming from a perspective of they don't see the big picture. It's almost like Jesus is this righteous, this pious man who's the one who's praying. He's able to see the big picture that these other people's don't. So that other people don't. So might get angry, they might insult, they might act with this attitude of
Hmm.
missing the big picture. And that's what I think the second usage of fool. And we're gonna use one more, even though there's 100 more. But I'm just use one more just to prove the points. And the last one is also from the Babylonian Talmud from 22a. And this one, it says, in short, to go to be baptized, to be immersed in the olden age, you have to have 40 seah of water, which is around 100 to 200 gallons of water. So they ask, is it possible for them to fulfill their needs with less water? Of course it is. Why do you have to have so much water? Isn't it possible for them to simply pour the water upon themselves? So again, very, very, I thought you'd be excited to hear some immersion texts. Rabbi Hanina, he answers by insisting on immersing in 40 seah in this 200 gallons of water. The sages, in effect, created a protective fence around the situation. As it says, it once happened that someone was propositioning himself to a woman to commit an immoral act. She replied to him, Reka, you bore. Do you have 40 seah available in which you can immerse after you proposed? Upon hearing her words, he immediately discontinued his attempt to seduce her and refrained from committing the sin. So in this situation, we have another that a person, when they're called a reka, they're able to see the light. This person was able
Hmm.
say like, oh wow, I'm acting horribly, uh,
Hmm.
and therefore I better kind of change my mind. I think when we call people bad names today, it goes two ways. Sometimes you call them such a bad word, it ends the conversation. But in all of our Reka conversations, it led to more conversation. Never was Reka the end of the conversation.
And yeah, uh-huh.
Okay. So those, I think like is a really, like, again, this might be a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's a really interesting idea that
Okay,
we,
but then here, right, he puts this. Okay, thanks for those three contexts from the Talmud. Those, it sounds like those three have different contexts than this, because here it says, whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire, right? I mean, so this one sounds like it's more. How do I say this? That it cuts off the conversation. Like, has that word been taken and then used in different context here? And as you said, this it's the Aramaic word with the Greek text, and at least in this context, it does it looks like it does not lead to any further conversation.
what's different about obviously the New Testament, that this is not a dialogue, this is a monologue, right?
Yeah.
So 100%, it doesn't lead to more or less conversation because it's just Jesus speaking. But when he says you fool, what he's just trying to point out is that it's one of the worst things you could do. It's showing that the person is completely lacking understanding of the situation. And let's imagine I'm the heretic and you're Jesus. If I say to you, Reka, it means that you're literally the opposite side of the kingdom of heaven. You're so far away from an understanding of what's happening that you're literally calling someone a Reka, even though you, by definition, are the Reka. You are the.
So when he says call someone Reka, do they have to verbally call them, or even that, that thought of saying, of thinking of that, wouldn't, again, based on what we read so far, where Jesus takes it to a higher standard, like, does this person have to verbally say this, or even the very thought of that?
The New Testament as a legislative text that's trying to tell you how to like literally act or not. So,
True.
so I don't know. I don't think you literally have to say this word versus other words. I think it just focused on the idea that this is the furthest level. This is a person who denies that which is in front of him.
Oh, well, that's a good way. The person who denies that which is friend of them. Hmm.
It's really interesting. A lot of scholars really can't understand. They feel like the last one, Reka, is not strong enough. Anger, then insult, then Reka. They don't see how Reka is the strongest of the batch. But really, we're showing how you fool, you empty one, you empty head is the worst one, because this is a person who can't see the kingdom of heaven in front of him. So I feel that the scholars who want to point out that it
That is
seems
very, Rabbi, that is very harsh, Rabbi. That's a very harsh word to say that, right? I mean, in that context, if anyone cannot see the kingdom of God in front of them, then they will be liable to the hell of fire. This is as worse as you're the salt of the earth.
right.
At least
That's
it's
what I'm
on
saying.
the.
100%. Again,
He's
like
saying, what he's saying is, if you're not part of Team Jesus, you're part of the hell of fire, right? He say, if you're not part of Team Jesus, you're the.
first of all, we would hope it would be systemic. Jesus already said that once, and I feel like we're not trying to chip away from that reality. If it's that you're either Team Jesus or you're not, then that's just it. So the fact that we have another verse, namely here 5:22, that reinforces that idea that you say you fool. I just think like it can't just be he's calling someone a name. That's why people misunderstand it when they say Reka, and it's just me calling you, oh, you jerk, you bum. That's not what it's saying here. It's saying almost like a philosopher who doesn't believe in the philosophy. It's a theologian who is the opposite. We saw from this case of Rabbi Yochanan that you call a Reka someone who doesn't believe what they see until what doesn't believe reality until they see with their own eyes. That is the opposite. Like, let's be honest, that's the case. Christians are still waiting for that today. Like the world hasn't changed into that messianic whole. So we see Reka as the term for the person who needs to see it with his own eyes. Rabbi Yochanan calls him Reka because he didn't believe until he saw with his own eyes. And just to be clear, that was a story in the Talmud. Like he didn't really see ministering angels in the ocean. The idea is that a Reka is someone who needs to see with his own eyes before he believes it. And that's the opposite of someone who's in the kingdom of heaven. That's a person who can only throw to the fires of hell, because that person can never be part of it. That person is not going to be about change. That person is going to be about believing what's in front of him. And that's the opposite, right? Jesus' mission is to show you that it's not what's in front of you, It's that you have to go super erogation, go one level past. It's
Yeah.
not about the physical world in front of you. You have to go one level past.
Yeah, so thank you. This is lots to process. Now let's take a step back. So at this time we have Jesus, we have his disciples, the people around them, and the people around him who who listening to to these words of his. So when he used this in that time, it's not so. I don't mean to say what would have this meant to them, but was he addressing certain things which are happening at that time? Because to pick anger and insult and Raka as in somebody who denies reality, like these were ordinary people. He was not talking to the chief priests or the scribes or the Pharisees or the learned people. These were ordinary people, right? So when they heard these words, or what did he mean these words to make or
the question, Isaac? The question: how do we deal with? How do people understand his speeches? That's our common question these days.
Yeah.
When people heard Reka, what do they mean? When they heard these three levels, how do again, like, we don't know the answer. All we know, it's more, for me, it's more important to hear the monologue. What is he trying to say more than how it's received? Because for all we know, they misreceive everything. Yeah. So we don't know. I do think it's important that this Raka, the word Raka, is original in the original Greek manuscript, even though it's not a Greek word, because they didn't want to translate that word. I think that word was so common, even maybe in the Greek speaking world or wherever this was for, because the Greek speaking word is right next to the Aramaic speaking world, so who knows? But this was such a common word, this empty one, that it was very important not to translate it. Yeah, and again, you just see lots of people struggle. Like, how come it doesn't say this? It's usually translated as moros, which is a fool. But again, which I don't deny that. I just think that we definitely have a greater context, and therefore we have the gradations. We have it going in. It makes sense from low to high.
So the biggest mistake a person can make is to deny reality. If they've seen reality, they deny that. He's saying if somebody sees reality and then if they would deny.
The point is, at the end of the day, from a sapiential eschatological perspective, you never really see a changed world before, during, or after Jesus' life. So Jesus is trying to, that's why I keep using the parable of beer goggles. Jesus needs you to see the world you're seeing through different eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone is going to deny that framework, that context, they can't see it, that person is part of the problem for him, because he needs you to act differently to bring about a different world. He doesn't need you to act differently because it is a different world.
He wants you to act differently so that he can bring about a different world, and not because it's nice. Yeah.
Okay. One verse at a time, Isaac. We'll be on chapter 5 until we're dead, it seems.
Yeah, it's lots to process. No, thank you. I think even one with there's just lots to chew on each single verse at a time. What I've been thinking about is, again, this goes back to the discussion earlier, where Jesus' message, his life was so predominantly focused on the Jewish people. He did not make any attempt to even reach out to the non-Jewish audience. And I, as who's not Jewish, has no background in Jewish faith or life, so far I've probably read this from a Pauline perspective, or from my own Christian beer goggles of looking at this through a certain way. And now, in our conversations, what has stood out is the Jewishness of Jesus, is how they shaped his life, and how the scriptures have to be read from that context. Because at this time, again, when these words were said, Paul was not there, antinomianism was not there. It is, again, working within the law, keeping the requirements of the law. And that, to me, is something I've been grappling with this. What could this have meant? And other ways and how these verses can be interpreted versus the traditional Christian Pauline way of, this tying this back to love for God, love for neighbors, don't look at content. But again, what he described right now is very different. It's not the traditional Christian understanding of this. What he's saying is, if some, again, as what Jesus wants people to do is to bring about his kingdom by acting in a certain way, and if they see reality and they deny that, he calls them like there is no hope for them, which is a very different perspective than this concept of, just love and kindness, just be kind. It is very different.
That's not the Jesus we see in Matthew.
That's certainly the Jesus we see in Matthew. That's true. That is true.
Okay, we'll call it a day.
Okay. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.